Hi everyone, it's Amy here and this is video number 3 in the Back to School Ready series. Yesterday we talked all about timetables, and if you haven't seen that video yet, I highly recommend that you go and watch that first because I'll probably be referencing that video a few times in this one, so it's probably handy if you've seen that video first. Today we're going to be talking about all things planning. So we're going to start off by looking at the Australian curriculum and how to make sure that you are teaching everything that you need to teach and keeping a track of that. We're then going to have a look at term planners and why I highly recommend that you have one. We're going to be talking about programs and how to pick a program that you might like to use. Then we're going to be looking at how to plan units, which a lot of you might have learnt that sort of thing in university, but I'm going to cover it anyway and just give you my approach to it. And then we're also going to be talking about weekly programming and how you can kind of take the burden off each week and make that a little bit easier for you. So let's start off with the Australian curriculum, or whatever your state refers to it, because for a while there it looked like the whole of Australia was going to have the same curriculum and it was so exciting to be on the same page as everybody, and then slowly the states have started changing the curriculum to suit their state and different things, and now it's a little bit of a muddle and a mess. Basically though, most states still follow the Australian curriculum, just with a few tweaks. And if you know what those tweaks are, it makes it easier to see whether different things align with your state's curriculum or not. So for example, here in WA, SCASA is our reporting authority and curriculum people, and I looked through the WA curriculum to compare it to the Australian curriculum, and the main differences was there was a couple in HASS, and then the wording for design and technology changes for the skill side of things, but other than that it's just an exact copy of the Australian curriculum. So if you can, definitely talk to some other teachers or have a look at the curriculums yourself and compare them, and just kind of see where they compare to each other if your state isn't using the exact Australian curriculum, because that's just going to make things a lot easier when you're looking at resources and different things like that, to know where the differences are and what you need to be aware of when you're picking and choosing resources that say they're aligned to the Australian curriculum. I recommend having some sort of printout of the Australian curriculum or your state's curriculum that is easy to read and look at. What I mean by that is, if you go to the Australian curriculum website and you download the Australian curriculum, they have like, I don't know, 5 outcomes per page, and you end up with this humongous document that you've got to try and leaf through that has all this extra information in it as well, and you really don't need all that. So what I did was I made curriculum checklists which had just the outcomes for each subject. I tried to keep the subjects as condensed as I could. English goes to about 3 pages, maths usually goes to about 2, but things like science and stuff can usually stick to 1. And I chose to do 4 columns, and what I use those columns for is each term. So what I like to do is when each term has ended, or you can do this on a weekly basis, especially if you're a new graduate and you're planning per week, you might just want to go through and tick each week. But as I cover an outcome, I just put a little tick there to say, yep, I've covered that outcome. Or if it's more of like covering it incidentally, so like I'll mention it every now and again and raise their awareness of it, then I might write down that it was incidental. Sometimes I write down the week, so I did it in week 3, or I did it in week 6, 7 and 8, and it just keeps a bit of a record of when I'm addressing things. So as the terms progress, I can see if there's any gaps, and I can go, oh, I haven't done anything on that outcome, so that's what I'm going to do in term 4. Or I haven't addressed that outcome since term 1, I think I'd really need to use it again, so I can address it in term 4. So I think having some sort of checklist for the Australian curriculum, or whatever state curriculum you use, you've got it there and you can see it really easily, what you haven't done, what you have. Depending on the state that you're in, the Australian curriculum has elaborations. Now, if you haven't heard this already, the elaborations are not a be-all end-all. If you follow the elaborations and only taught to the elaborations, you would not be addressing the full Australian curriculum. The elaborations are just some examples of what those outcomes might mean and how you might be able to address them, but they are not the complete curriculum. So if you're a bit confused by one of the outcomes, you're like, what does this mean? Definitely go and check out the elaborations, but don't use the elaborations as a checklist of what to cover. Some states have syllabuses or syllabi, and in those cases you will need to check out the syllabus as to what it says, but you might like to turn them into a checklist and go through them, like a ticker box type thing. It really depends on your curriculum and how it is done. Some states also really like you to look at the achievement standards. WA is like that. They like you to assess or do the grades according to the achievement standards, but the thing is, the achievement standards are usually the outcomes just compressed into a paragraph. Sometimes they might take a couple of keywords out, but seldom have I ever seen new things introduced into the achievement standards that weren't in the outcomes as a whole. So again though, if you would prefer to be by the book exactly, and you want to take that paragraph and break them up into little checker boxes, you could definitely do that. But I think a lot of the sentences need to be broken up into more checker boxes than just one per sentence, because those sentences often have a lot to them. Now, if you are stuck on a certain outcome and you're kind of like, what does this mean? You can definitely go to Google and Google the actual outcome number or what the outcome actually says, and you will get different resources popping up. So Scoodle is one that pops up quite a lot. And then when you look at the resources, you can kind of gauge what that outcome was talking about. There's definitely a big open to interpretation with a lot of the outcomes. I can look at one outcome and think, oh, this is what it means to me, and another teacher can look at it and go, something completely different. So you definitely want to be talking to other teachers in your grade level about the different outcomes and how they're approaching it, how they're teaching it, to kind of get that whole encompassing viewpoint towards it, to make sure you're really developing those outcomes. Make sure you're utilising your departmental resources. So if you're in WA, we have the judging standards, which definitely come in handy at reporting time, but they can also be used for teaching, to actually look at it and go, am I teaching the entire curriculum A grade to E grade? Again, I'm only in WA, I haven't lived in any of the other states, so I can't speak for your curriculum, but just ask teachers around you, like, is there a resource that I should be using? Is there a resource that you really, really love? And find out from other teachers which ones. The next thing that I highly recommend you do is take the Australian curriculum and split it up into a term planner. The way that I do my term planners is I look at my timetable at the different subjects or the different topics that I'm teaching, and I take each one of those topics and I put it as a header in my term planners. And then I go to the Australian curriculum and I look at where that information comes into the Australian curriculum, and I take keywords out as to what I should be teaching in different times. So for example, I've got the term 1 for year 2 planner up here, and if I look at the maths side, what I've done is I've gone through the Australian curriculum for year 2 and taken out some key topics from each of those outcomes. So I've got graphing and number and place value, addition, patterns and skip counting. Each of those relate to a specific outcome in the Australian curriculum. For something like punctuation and grammar, I've looked at the Australian curriculum for year 2 and I've taken out the key things that I could see there that came under grammar, and I also went to the year 1 curriculum and made sure that I was revising anything that came under there, because obviously even though the outcomes of this is what you should be addressing in year 2, you want to make sure that you're building on what they did in grade 1 and then they're not losing some of that knowledge. So it's nice, especially in English and maths, to bring some of those outcomes up. And when you're first starting to teach, you might just want to do term 1's planner first and not really think about the rest of the year yet, because you want to start getting your head around the curriculum. So what I would usually do when I was first teaching and I started using term planners, I used term planners from the get-go. I might show you a picture of my first term planner that I did. It definitely didn't look like my current one. It's evolved a lot since then, but I've always used term planners. And what I would do is at the end of the term, I would go to my checklist and I would tick off what I had done, and then I would look at what the gaps were to fill in the term 2 planner. So that worked really, really good for my head. I'm going to come back and I'm going to talk a bit more about these term planners when we talk about weekly programming, because the main reason I do term planners is it helps so much with weekly planning, especially the way that I do term planners now. You'll also notice at the bottom of my current term planners, I talk about units. So for things like text types, technology, health, HAS, science, I make them a unit planner because it's not about an outcome that I can break up into weekly parts, like, oh, this week I'm going to do this for HAS and this week I'm going to do this for HAS in a keyword. It doesn't really work that way for me, like the way my head thinks. So what I've done for them is I've done unit planners up. And again, I'll talk more about how I do my unit planners up later on. But for me, I don't need each incidental thing that I'm teaching every week for those on my term planner, because I have a unit planner that covers those. Whereas something like reading groups, I don't need to do a unit planner up on it, because reading groups, or literacy rotations is what I call them now, is done in the same format every single week. The kids come to me, we read a text together, and we focus on this skill. So why would I need to do up a more detailed unit planner for that, where I can just have the keywords on my term planner and I know which focus I'm working on that week. So when we're looking at the text, my questions that I ask just need to be focused around that. In terms of creative writing, I spoke yesterday about my timetabling and how I like to have a lesson each week where I can target different text types as in addition to the text type unit planner that I do. So my text type unit planner might be looking at procedure writing, but I still want to revise persuasive and recount. So creative writing is a chance where I get to do all of those things. So if you're liking the look of my term planners and you kind of are looking at it going, oh, I wish that I had all the curriculum like laid out like that so I know exactly what to teach each week, I do actually have the term planners available for years 1 to 6 for free if you sign up to my email list. So I'll leave the link for that in the description of this video. But basically it sends the term 1 planner to your inbox. It's fully editable, so you can go in there and you can make any tweaks or changes you want. So for example, if you are at a school that has a different subject that you have to teach and you want to break it up into the weekly things, you could add that subject in there. Or if you look at it and you go, oh, I don't really want to teach vocabulary, that's really not my thing, you could just delete that whole column and not have to worry about it. If you think, oh, she's got biological science for term 1, whereas I really like to start off the year with earth and science, then you can make all those changes yourself. You can make the term planners yours, and it needs to work for you. We don't all teach the same. We all have different teaching styles, and so you need to make this work for you and aligned to your school. So like I said, I'll leave the link. If you are interested, you can go and do that. So next we're going to talk about programs. When I talk about a program, when I use that word, I am talking about something that is completely ready for you to use in your classroom. Generally speaking, most programs that teachers use usually came in from a whole school approach, but some teachers can definitely seek out different programs themselves and use them. The benefit to doing whole school programs though is that the resources are usually all there in the school, so you don't have any out-of-pocket expenses. You just go into the library and ask for all those resources to do that particular program. So for example, at my school, since I've been there, we did the Stepping Stones maths program for a while. We've started doing sound waves recently. We did Words Their Way for a while. And as those have come in for a whole school approach and you've used them, we've decided that they're not for us, but some teachers will still be using them. I know of a couple of teachers in my school that are very active in finding new programs and trialing them in their classroom, and then they kind of report back to the rest of us as to whether they're good programs or not and whether we should adopt them. And that's how we kind of learn about them. A lot of the programs out there also have PDs surrounding them, so if there's something that you want to know about and you think, oh, maybe that program might be right for me, definitely check out whether they have a PD that you can do on them first before you buy all the resources. Definitely talk to other teachers in your school about programs they use and like, and have a look through the resources before you buy it just to see whether it's going to suit your style. How do you know if you want to use a program in a certain area? Well, it basically comes down to your knowledge level and your passion for a certain subject. So for example, when I was at uni, I knew that I wanted to develop my own spelling program. I had been a terrible speller in primary school, and as I went through uni, I kind of started coming up with these ideas for what would make a really good spelling program, and I started developing my own at the end of my uni years, and I was so excited to employ it in my classroom in my first year, and I still use that spelling program to this day, and it's refined over the years. And even when our school adopted sound waves, I still kept my spelling program in addition to sound waves because I knew how effective my spelling program was. So if you feel passionate about a subject, you feel like you already know enough about it to do your own thing, then do that. However, if there's a subject where you're kind of thinking like, I have no idea how to approach this, it seems too large to me, I don't know where to start, then a program is a great thing to do. It's a great thing to adopt there. So let's say maths is not your strong point and you'd rather go with a maths program that's going to tell you exactly what to do every single day. The first thing I'd probably do is talk to other teachers and say, what's a maths program that you really like? Do you use a maths program? Go to your school's resources section and see if there's any already bought stuff. The school might not be using it as a whole school right now. They might have used it before, but all the resources might be there, and it's just a great starting place. Even if it's not perfect, even if you use it for one term and then go, that wasn't right for me, it's still a starting place if you need it. Okay? The other thing you can do is go to Google and look up the different programs that are available out there. As I said a minute ago, there are often PDs that you can go and attend on these different programs. Just find out as much as you can about programs before you adopt one, because often with a lot of programs there's a lot of setup or a lot of resources that you have to buy before you can even start to implement it. So just do your research first. But it is definitely a way to take off a lot of pressure from you by adopting another program that's all done for you. If you are interested in my spelling program, I will link the PD session that I have for it below. It is called a targeted spelling approach, and you can definitely watch the PD, pick up lots of ideas for implementing spelling in your own classroom and kind of modge podge your own approach if you want. But I do have all the resources that go with it if you would like to use all of those, but it's definitely a standalone program that you can implement with any list that your school might be using. Okay, so let's talk about unit planning now. When I say units, I am talking about a planning document that takes a few units from a certain subject and plans out each lesson and exactly what you're going to do in each of those lessons. It usually builds upon a concept. I do unit planning for health, text types, HAS, technologies, science, and there's probably one that I'm forgetting in there somewhere. I love using unit planners for them because it just gives me a cohesive look of the whole unit that I'm doing. Whereas if I was just planning week to week, I think there wouldn't be as much built upon knowledge there, and it doesn't get as in-depth as you can with a unit planner. You may have learned about doing unit planning in university, but what I find is once you get out in the real world, a lot of teachers no longer do them. They just kind of plan per week. So here's a lesson, okay, this is a lesson, here's a lesson. And while that approach can work, I do think it takes up more time, because each week when you're doing your planning, you then have to go, oh, what was that outcome? What have I already covered? What lessons have I already done? But if you do a unit planner, then all that thinking's already done for you, and all you have to do is copy and paste that lesson out each week into your weekly planner. So I definitely recommend unit planning. The first thing that I do is I take the Australian curriculum and I work out which outcomes I want to cover in my unit. My units are generally 10 lessons long because I do one lesson per week on that subject. So I have it, as I said in my timetable video, I teach HAS every single week, once a week, and so my unit planner would cover each of those weeks. I then take those outcomes and I kind of do a brainstorm. I flesh out what each of those outcomes means. I look at the elaborations, I look at any judging standards that relate, and just try and flesh out exactly what this unit needs to cover. I then start doing a bit of a brainstorm where I think about different activities that align well to the different content. So let's say I'm doing a HAS planner and we're talking about Australian government, and it says that I have to do the different roles within the different parliamentary houses. So maybe I think, oh, well, a matching activity could go really well with that. They could match the role to the title of the role. And so I just kind of see what kind of things come naturally to me. Before I started my own store, I definitely used Pinterest a lot. I went to Pinterest to find a lot of ideas, see what's already out there. You definitely don't have to reinvent the wheel for every single thing that you do within your teaching job. Now that I do my own units and I sell them online, I try and keep it with my own head and my own ideas so that they're all original and unique. Once you've kind of got your activities there, you want to start thinking about what order would be best to teach them. So where is your A point, and then where do you want to end up as, and what's your journey to get there? So on my brainstorm, I actually start putting numbers around about which order I think things will go to. Then I go to my planning document, and planning documents are so important. They need to be a document that works for you and your head and how you think. For me, I wanted a planning document that had the necessities on it, but I didn't want them to have a wealth of information that wasn't necessary every time I looked at the unit planner. So I didn't put the achievement standards on there. I didn't put the elaborations on there. I didn't put the cross-curriculum links and exactly what everything means and copying and pasting large text over from the Australian curriculum. I just wanted the basics. So my unit planner just has at the top a key for different levels of activity. So I have a symbol that means individual work, a symbol that means group work, and whole class work. I have the, what are they called? The general capabilities across the top so I can see that I'm addressing them. I found it really handy to have the teaching strategies as another category on the top so that I could always make sure I was using lots of collaborative learning strategies and trying to include a range within one lesson so I wasn't always doing the same thing. And then that's where I put underneath that the outcomes that I'm addressing. And again, it's just the particular outcomes. It's not the elaborations or the achievement standards. Then what I do is under that I have the week or the lesson in one column. The next column is the lesson focus. So if you have learning intentions in your class, or like things that you have to put up on the board, wilts and waltz and all that, that's probably where you're going to write that. I use it as an area to show what's the focus of this lesson, what's the point that I'm trying to get across to my students, what is the main thing that I'm trying to address with them, or what is the main part of the activity. The next section is where I write the actual lesson plan. And again, I try and keep it very succinct. I don't want one that's like a whole page per lesson because nobody's got time to read that. So I tried to keep them as short as I can, but specific enough where I can come back to it year after year and know exactly what I was talking about when I was doing that lesson. So it's a fine line to try and come to, but the more specific you are, the easier it's going to be to use year after year. Or like if you're in year 5 one year and then you're not there for another 5 years, you want to be able to come back to those planning documents and you want them to make sense to you. But at the same time, you don't want it to take you an hour just to read through it before you teach each lesson. Then the next column is resources that I need to teach each of those. And then the final one is the assessments column. There is an assessment for every single lesson, but sometimes that's as simple as just observing, like just whether the lesson was a success or a failure. Like this is how I know that this lesson went well, or this is how I know that it didn't go well, or this is what the students need to have achieved by the end of the lesson. It doesn't need to be a checklist every single time you do a lesson or a rubric. You don't have to be assessing every single lesson in huge amounts of detail. So once I've got it mapped out about what I'm going to be addressing each week, I then go to the lesson focuses and write them. So I'm very, very clear about what each lesson is going to be about. Then I start putting in my rough kind of ideas for each lesson, and then I go back to them each one at a time and flesh them out more. And that's also when I do a lot more of my research for resources that can help with each lesson. So if I need a video from YouTube, or if I need an interactive activity or something like that, that's when I'll go and source them. It's also when I'll make up any of the resources that I need for the lessons that I can't find anywhere else, like if I have to make up my own worksheets. Once I've done my unit planner, I definitely keep it as a working document. It's not a lock-in contract that you have to do every single week exactly the same thing that's written on there. Maybe you get halfway through a lesson and you go, oh, this isn't working, and you change it up. Go back to your unit planner and write that in there, whether it's like a hard copy that you're writing on, pen, or whether you go back to your digital copy, but just mark in anything that worked or didn't work and how you want to change it. So maybe you put in a note for next year saying this lesson did not work. Completely change it. Or maybe you add in some tweaks about how it could be better, like, oh, I should add this section to my worksheet. So keep them as working documents, keep them changing. Having a system for how to write a unit planner really helps streamline the process, and you can get a lot faster at it. If you kind of just sit down at your computer and go, I'm going to write a program today, you're kind of like, well, where do I start? So having a system, whether it be mine about the brainstorming and the keywords and then the planner and all that sort of stuff, whether that one works for you or whether you need a different sort of approach, just find a system and then stick to that with every planner that you do. Each planner doesn't have to be perfect. You can definitely write just little bits and pieces in before you teach it, and then go back after the lesson and write more and flesh it out more. Just as long as you're starting to think about the unit and how everything fits together, it's just going to help you a lot more with your weekly planning. The other question I get asked when I do unit planning is, well, how can I plan a unit if I don't know where my students are at yet? And that's why I do unit planning for text types, health, HAS, and technologies and science, is because it doesn't really matter where your students are at the time. The content is still the content that you have to teach. So for example, in year 4, they have to look at, I think it's South America and Europe. And it doesn't matter how well they did on that or how much information they retained from those 2 countries. In year 5, they've got to look at 2 completely different countries. So there's no prior knowledge necessary there that they would have got from year 4 to put into year 5 that's going to affect how you plan. So by choosing subjects that align themselves well to forward planning, it saves you more time. And like I said before, it's not a lock-in contract. You can go back to it at any stage, and if you go, wow, I planned this HAS unit for my kids, but they're actually a lot weaker than I thought in their writing ability, and this unit uses a lot of writing stuff, it's not hard to go back and tweak something that's already made than it is to write it in the first place. So I definitely recommend getting a head start on unit planning if you can now. Last week's video I said if there's one thing you did during the holidays, do your timetable. If you have time to dedicate during your holidays and you're motivated, definitely start on unit planning. The more units you have planned going into term 1, the easier term 1 is going to be for you. When I was at uni and we did our ATP, we had to have, I think it was 3 or 4 forward planning documents done, which were my unit planners. And then the next year, because that was a year 3 class, I went into a year 1-2 class. And so what I did was I took those unit planners and I just tweaked them for the year 1s. So I had a health planner that was on fruit and vegetables, like healthy eating, and I tweaked that to be suitable for a year 1 class. I had a unit for HAS that was on communities, and again, I tweaked that for a year 1 class. So if you take some stuff that you've already got done and you build upon that for your first year of teaching, it just lightens the load. I had 3 subjects that I didn't have to plan for in term 1 because I was reusing stuff that I had done in uni. So see if you have some stuff that you can repurpose like that. Of course, some things aren't always going to be suitable because of the different outcomes, but just see what you've got. So we've talked about making sure you're addressing the Australian curriculum. We've talked about term plans. We've talked about programs. We've talked about planning your units. The next thing we need to talk about is your weekly programming, or I call them weekly timetables, but you know, different states will probably call them different things. On your ATP, you probably started off using a DWP or a daily work pad. You could definitely still use that if that approach worked for you, but I like looking at the week overview. I like seeing the whole week in front of me and knowing what's happening on each day and just planning the whole week at once, so I can sit down at my computer on one of my prep sessions and just get into the planning mode. If you're thinking, okay, on this prep session here I'll plan Monday, and on this prep session here I'll plan Tuesday and Wednesday, and on my weekend I'll do Thursday, Friday, or something like that, it's just going to make things harder for you because you'll have to get you set up, you have to get all your resources together every single time you want to plan. So I definitely recommend trying to plan a whole week at once. And so finding a format that you're going to plan on is your first mission, whether you want to go digital or do handwritten hard copy. I am definitely all about the digital, and there's a couple of reasons for that. One, I find it's quicker to type than it is to write down, and my writing, if I'm trying to be too quick, often ends up messy, and then nobody wants to look at a weekly planner that's all messy. So it can just take up a lot more time trying to handwrite it. Also, by doing it digitally, I can just copy and paste. So before, when I was talking about my unit planner, I was talking about how I can just copy that lesson that I've written, put it straight into my weekly planner, and now I'm ready to teach. Whereas if you did that with a handwritten copy, you'd have to either say, you could just say like refer to the unit planner and then have the unit planner printed out separately, or you'd have to painstakingly write all those notes in. I also think when we plan digitally, we tend to plan more, we write more, whereas in a handwritten copy, we're kind of confined to the space that's there, and we might not plan in as much detail. I'm going to show you now some photos of my progression of planning from the first year that I graduated to now, and just how my planning approach has changed. And one of the things you'll notice is I started off with just kind of keywords like this activity, and it was just called that. And if I look back at a lot of those, I have no idea what I did there. No idea what that lesson was or how I approached it. Was it a worksheet that I had somewhere? Was it a printout? I have no idea with a lot of those because I wasn't planning in detail enough. And so the next year I started my first year in a year 1-2 class, and the next year I was in a straight year 1 class. And I went back to those timetables to see like what I could reuse, like what was I doing that week. And it really helped when I had planned detailed enough to be able to go, oh, well, that's what I taught. That lesson worked really well. And to copy it into my new year's timetable. But for the lessons that I couldn't remember what I'd done or what they were about, it was a lot more thinking involved to try and work it out or replan that lesson altogether. So by planning digitally, it makes it so much easier to refer back to previous year's planners and copy and paste over things that worked. You don't have to reinvent the wheel every single year. You can copy your lessons that you've done from the past. And rather than relying on your head to try and extract all of that, or trying to have copious amounts of planners that, you know, because after like 5 years you're going to have a lot of hard copy planners that you're going to have to try and look at to find one activity, whereas if it's all digital you just have to do a search on your computer. So I'm definitely all about the digital. You then have to find a format that works for you. I like to plan mine vertically. Some people like to do this horizontal. It's definitely a thing that you want to play with and like move things around until it works for you in your head. My planning, because I've started to get so detailed and I'm copying and pasting from a lot of unit planners that have a lot of instructions, my planner has gone from 1 page, which I used to love having a 1-page planner, to a 2-page planner. And what I started to find when it got to 2 pages was that I was spending half the day on 1 page and then I'd have to go to the second page to look at the second half of the day, and I didn't like that sort of flipping through of things, so I did end up just going for a portrait size A4 piece of paper and planning Monday to Tuesday on one side and Wednesday, Thursday, Friday on the back. And that's working for me at the moment, and I display it, oh I've got one here actually, I display it in one of these I don't know what they're called. I got it from Officeworks, but basically the paper just slots into this stand and then I just stand it up and then it's in my classroom whenever I need it, when I need to remind myself what I'm doing for lesson. I just have to grab this and I just have to look at this to know exactly what I am doing each day. So it makes it really, really easy. I tried having it in a display file for a while, like a display file like this one, but I had to keep opening it all the time, or I had to keep bending it back. I found because it was flat that I was losing it all the time and I didn't know where it was, and my desk is not always the neatest place during the school day, so having something that stands up like this, it's a lot easier to track where it is. So let's talk about weekly planning. I've already mentioned having one prep session every week, one allotted time where you sit down and you plan out the whole week. Spread out all of your planning documents that you're going to refer to, like your term planners or the Australian curriculum or a syllabus. Have your planner open, whether it's a digital one on your computer or a hard copy one. Go through all the routine things first, things that are done the same way every week but have a different topic. So for example, I said literacy rotations is done the same way every week but it changes topics. I take that topic, I write it into my timetable. Spelling for me is something that's routine every single week, but I have to pick an activity that goes with it each week. So I look at the contents page of the spelling activity and I work my way through. I grab 5 of those and put them in my planner. Then I go to my unit planners. So for HAS, I just open up my HAS, I go, okay, it's week 3, copy lesson 3 over into my digital planner, and that's HAS done. What I also do, I should say, is I also have a piece of paper next to me when I'm planning that I write out a to-do list on. So let's say I copied and pasted HAS over and I've got to photocopy a particular resource for that. I'll write it down and I'll go photocopy X resource. Or maybe I need to prep a certain thing for one of the activities, or maybe I need to bring something in from home. So I'm just writing that down, things that I need to do in addition to planning, on my piece of paper so it's nice and clear. After I've done my timetable, I've just got this piece of paper that I can go, well, this is all the stuff that I need to do to make sure that I'm ready for the week that I'm planning. Then I go through and look at the lessons that have an idea for them, like just a topic that I have to teach, but I've got to actually plan the lesson. So maybe it's one of those creative writing lessons and it says, oh, it's a narrative lesson. So that's where I'm going to start thinking, okay, what kind of narrative lesson could I do? I start maybe looking through my resources that I have. I might go to Pinterest or Google, or maybe there's an idea that I have from a recent PD or another teacher. That's when I'll start to plan those things. I always leave them to last, because if you try and start with them, you might end up sitting there going, oh, what do I do? What do I do? Whereas if you start with all the stuff that you know first, you sort of get on a productive flow, and then hopefully by the end of that, your ideas are going to start flowing naturally. And if they don't, then you just write that down on your to-do list. Plan the narrative lesson, okay? Having 1 or 2 lessons not planned for the week ahead, just floating around in your head, you might come up with an idea later on. Or you can go and see your mentor teacher and go, hey, I'm trying to do a narrative activity this week, have no idea what to do, any ideas? And they might give you a fantastic idea that you can copy. Oh, that was a lot. We've talked about how to cover the Australian curriculum, we've talked about term planners, we've talked about programs, we've talked about planning a unit, and we've talked about your weekly timetabling. A couple of tips before I leave you. Number 1, said it a few times in this video, do not feel like you have to invent the wheel. There's nothing that says you have to go into a classroom and do all your own original lessons every single week and you can't use any help from anywhere. Utilize things like Pinterest, buy resources from sellers if you feel comfortable doing that. Look for teacher resources that you can photocopy from. Talk to your teacher friends, get some resources from them if they have ones that they can share. You don't need to reinvent the wheel, you just need to make it through the year. Pick out your favorite subjects, plan in detail for them, and then use something else for all the rest. And then next year you can go through and start planning in more detail for those ones. Planning now is going to save you hours later on. While you're on holiday, if you're motivated, try and start to get some units underway. They don't have to be planned in full, or they don't have to be perfect, but start getting your ideas down on paper. Maybe you get all the Australian curriculum outcomes and you just start brainstorming. Like, just have, okay, here's HAS, here's some of the outcomes and you've got them on a piece of paper, and then just branch out from that some different ideas. Like, oh, the year 3s have to learn about celebrating different celebrations around the world. So I'm going to do Christmas here, I'm going to do Easter here, I'm going to do Anzac Day. Oh, I've got a resource for Anzac Day that I saw over here, I'm going to do that. And just, you know, flood your brainstorm with lots of ideas so that you can pick on them during the year. Find good resources. There is so many resources out there, but you want to pick the good, best ones. Pick ones that lots of people are recommending. Pick ones that when you look at them, they work for your brain. You look at them and go, yeah, that makes sense. I like the way this is laid out. Pick ones that look interesting. If they look interesting to you, they're going to look interesting to your students. Also, don't feel like you have to pay for all the resources you buy by yourself. You can definitely approach your principal and ask if there is a school budget that you can utilize to buy some of the resources. Check if there is a new grad bonus that you can use. I know some states do it where you actually can buy funds, you can use funds through your school that have been allocated to your school because you are there as a new graduate. So definitely check and see whether you've got that. Check your school resources, your school library, or wherever your school keeps all their books and resources. There's usually a wealth of stuff in there. Half of it never even gets used. So just go and spend a day with your librarian, ask if you can just go out the back or wherever the resources are kept, and just spend some time just looking through what's there. When you open up a book, if something looks interesting to you, if it looks like it's good quality, if it fits how your brain works and your teaching style, then borrow it out, have it in your classroom. I usually use little flag post-it notes all through those kinds of books to see like what activities I like. If you open up a book and it kind of just goes blank, like it's just there, and put it back, don't use it. Just look for resources you really like. There are plenty of websites out there to help you. There are plenty of free resources and paid resources. Obviously, there's Teachers Pay Teachers. There are Australian sellers you can look for. There's publication companies. There's a whole host of places you can look for resources. It can be overwhelming though, so that's where you go back to recommendations from other teachers that you know about what to use and what not to use. If you do buy anything for yourself, remember to keep the receipt because it can be used as a tax deduction at tax time. The last thing I want to mention is it can be easy to be sucked into the Pinterest world and see a lot of like resources that people have done on there and the ways that they've then displayed them, but don't feel like every single lesson that you do has to be Pinterest worthy. You know, what is the child getting out of it? Like, what are they actually doing? Like, for example, I see activities all the time where they look amazing, but when you actually look at the content on them, it's so little and far between. It's like, was it really worth the kids colouring in every single little picture on that and joining all of those little pieces together to make that activity? What are they actually getting out of it? And have you achieved your purpose? So don't feel like every single activity needs to look amazing, okay? You can get kids to roll up their own templates in an exercise book. You don't have to be photocopying everything for them. You don't have to put everything up on the displays on the wall, so not everything has to be looking fabulous or be a polished, finished copy. I am out of breath. I need a drink real bad, so I'm going to leave this video here. So I hope you guys have found this video really useful. I hope it wasn't too overwhelming for you. It's definitely one that you might want to come back and watch again at a later date just to pick up some more tips and tricks as you refine your practices and get your systems in place. I will see you guys for the next lesson tomorrow. Bye!